Now look, the question itself is a beautiful trap. It is exactly the kind of question that feels profound when you first hear it. But the moment you sit down and actually think about what you are really asking, the whole comfortable assumption underneath it just collapses. You are smuggling in the idea that somebody made a choice, that there was a moment where some conscious mind looked at a blank page and decided, yes, 2 trillion sounds about right. And I want to tell you, as gently but as honestly as I possibly can, that this is not how the universe works, not even slightly. The universe does not have a preference. It does not care about round numbers. It does not sit down and deliberate over quantities. The 2 trillion galaxies we are talking about are not the result of a decision. They are the result of physics. Blind, relentless, magnificent, utterly indifferent physics. And the moment you really understand that, the number stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like what it actually is, which is an inevitable output of a set of initial conditions that had absolutely no interest in us whatsoever. Let me try to show you what I mean with something a little more concrete. Imagine a hurricane, not a little tropical storm. I mean a truly enormous hurricane, continent-sized, a roaring thermodynamic monster covering millions of square miles, with cloud towers punching into the stratosphere and pressure gradients and wind speeds that could tear steel apart. Now, take a single water molecule. One molecule of H2O bouncing around inside one tiny droplet, inside one unremarkable cloud, on the inner edge of one of the outer spiral bands of this massive howling system. Now ask this. Did the hurricane build all those other millions of storm clouds just for that one water molecule? Did the storm know the molecule was there? Did it construct its vast, swirling architecture as a home, as a purpose, as a deliberate shelter for that one small thing? Of course not. The hurricane does not know the molecule exists. The hurricane is not doing anything deliberately at all. It is simply obeying thermodynamic laws, moving heat from a warm ocean surface into a cooler atmosphere, conserving momentum, following pressure gradients, building complexity not out of intention but out of pure physical reflex. The clouds are not built for the molecule. The molecule is simply caught up in a process that operates on scales so far beyond it that the very question of purpose becomes meaningless. That is us. That is precisely our situation. We are the molecule asking why the storm was built for us. Now let us talk about where the storm actually comes from, because this is where it gets genuinely exciting. In the very earliest moments of the universe, we are not talking about seconds. We are talking about fractions of a second, so small that ordinary language does not really have the vocabulary for them. Something extraordinary happened. The universe underwent a period of expansion so violent and so rapid that it makes every explosion you have ever imagined look like a gentle breeze. Physicists call it inflation. In a time interval of roughly 10 to the power of negative 32 seconds, the observable universe expanded by a factor that is almost insultingly large to try to write down. We are talking about something smaller than a proton being stretched to roughly the size of a grapefruit in an interval of time that has more zeros after the decimal point than the entire age of the universe has seconds. Now here is the beautiful and terrifying part of this. At the quantum scale, the subatomic scale that governed the universe before inflation began, space is not smooth. It is not clean. It is jittery and uncertain and constantly fluctuating in tiny, random ways. These are not engineering defects. They are a fundamental feature of quantum mechanics. The vacuum itself buzzes with uncertainty. Energy densities shimmer and fluctuate randomly at every point in space on the smallest scales. And what inflation did was take those tiny, random, subatomic jitters and stretch them. It amplified microscopic quantum noise into macroscopic density variations that eventually became the seeds of everything. The regions where quantum fluctuations happened to produce slightly more energy density became, after billions of years of gravitational collapse, the great filaments and walls of the cosmic web, the clusters and superclusters of galaxies we map today. The regions of slightly lower density became the vast cosmic voids, the enormous empty spaces between the galaxy walls. The 2 trillion galaxies are not a design, they are a scar. They are frozen quantum noise, stretched to cosmic proportions by an inflationary process that had no goal and no destination. The fact that they exist in the particular arrangement they do is not the signature of an architect, it is the signature of randomness amplified to a scale that breaks the human imagination. And this leads directly into something I find almost unbearably elegant in its coldness. People sometimes ask, well, why is the universe so finely tuned for life? Why do the constants of nature seem to permit atoms to form, stars to burn, carbon to exist, biology to assemble itself? And the uncomfortable but completely honest answer is, we only notice fine-tuning because we are here to notice it. This is what cosmologists call the anthropic principle, or more precisely the weak version of it. It is not mystical. It is not a proof of design. It is a basic statement about observation bias. Consider the following. If the physical constants had come out differently, if the ratio of the electromagnetic force to gravity had been slightly different, or if the cosmological constant had been much larger, then no atoms would have formed, no stars would have ignited, no planets would have congealed from stellar debris, and no living things would have assembled from chemistry. And in that universe, there would be nobody wondering why the constants are the way they are, because there would be nobody at all. The universes that do not permit life do not produce observers. The universes that do permit life produce observers who then look around and marvel at how perfectly suited everything seems. But this is not because those universes were designed for observers. It is because observers, by definition, can only exist in universes that permit observers. The selection effect is total, and it is complete. Now take this principle and combine it with the sheer scale of the cosmos and the statistical nature of what we are talking about. 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy containing on average somewhere between 10 billion and a trillion stars, each star potentially hosting multiple planetary bodies. The number of individual physical locations where the local conditions might, under the right circumstances, permit chemistry to organize itself into self-replicating structures is so staggeringly enormous that life does not need to be likely. Life does not need to be probable on any given world. Life only needs to be not impossible, and over enough chances, over enough time, over enough volume, the improbable becomes the inevitable. We are not proof of a plan. We are a statistical inevitability in a sufficiently large, sufficiently old, sufficiently complex physical system. And the relief I feel at this, the aesthetic satisfaction, is something I find very hard to put into words. Now let us talk about the blind builder. Because even after inflation cedes, the density variations, and even after the anthropic principle explains why we observe friendly constants, somebody still has to actually build the galaxies. And that builder is gravity. Once the universe cooled enough for neutral hydrogen atoms to form, roughly 380,000 years after the initial expansion, the universe became a vast, mostly uniform cloud of cold gas. Mostly uniform, but not perfectly uniform because of those quantum fluctuations we talked about. There were tiny ripples in the density. Some regions had a fraction of a percent more matter than the average. And gravity, which has one job and does it without any hesitation or mercy, began pulling at those overdense regions. Gravity does not ask why. Gravity does not have a preference for galaxies over formless gas clouds. Gravity simply pulls mass toward mass, at a rate governed by the inverse square of the distance between them. It cannot do anything else. It is a geometric consequence of mass warping spacetime, as we understand it from general relativity, and it operates continuously, relentlessly, without pause, without intention. Over millions of years, the slightly overdense regions pulled in more gas from surrounding space. The more gas they accumulated, the stronger their gravitational pull. The stronger their pull, the more gas they accumulated. This is a runaway process, a feedback loop with no off switch, and it compressed hydrogen gas into regions dense enough and hot enough to ignite nuclear fusion. Stars lit up. The first stars were probably enormous by today's standards, burning fast and hot and ending their lives in spectacular explosions that seeded space with heavier elements. Those heavier elements, carbon and oxygen and iron and silicon, became the raw material for the next generation of stars, and for the rocky planets that eventually formed around them. Gravity built galaxies the way a river carves a canyon, not because it wanted to, not because it had a destination in mind, but because the physics gave it no alternative. Put enough matter in enough proximity, with enough time, and gravitational collapse is not a possibility. It is a certainty. The galaxies are not an achievement. They are what happens when you leave hydrogen gas and the laws of physics alone for 1 billion years. So we come back to the question, why 2 trillion galaxies? And the answer that the physics actually gives us is something like this. Given the quantum state of the early universe, given the parameters of inflation, given the cosmological constant, and the values of the fundamental forces, given the age of the universe and the amount of matter available, roughly 2 trillion gravitationally bound galactic structures in the observable volume is what you get, not as a choice, not as a statement, not as a gift, but as an output, a calculable, in principle, predictable output of equations that care nothing for the beings who eventually learn to write them down. And here is what I want to leave you with, not as a summary of what came before, but as a genuinely new thought. There is a certain kind of person who hears all of this and feels something collapse. The bigness of the universe, the indifference of the physics, the statistical accident of our existence. It sounds like it ought to be depressing, but I find it the opposite, because think about what we are actually doing when we work this stuff out. We are water molecules who figured out that we are in a hurricane. We are quantum fluctuations who grew into brains capable of deriving the equations that describe quantum fluctuations. That is not diminishing. That is the most astonishing thing I can imagine. The universe did not build us to understand it. But somehow, by pure physical accident, the blind process that built the galaxies also built creatures who can sit down and reconstruct the first fraction of a second of cosmic history from first principles. Creatures who can look at the cosmic microwave background radiation, that faint afterglow of the early universe still faintly visible in every direction, and read in its temperature fluctuations the direct imprint of those primordial quantum jitters. Creatures who can hold 2 trillion galaxies in their head as a mathematical consequence of initial conditions. That is not a small thing. That is a thrilling thing. Not because someone planned for it, precisely because nobody did.